We've got one word for this week's podcast.
Dynamite!
Yes, this week it's back to the 1970s, the favorite decade for one of us. This is the Fright Club podcast.
I'm Hope Madden.
And I'm George Wolf, and we're from madwolf.com, and it's all about our favorite horror movies from the 1970s this week, because of course, last week we started with the 60s.
Yeah, and we got a lot of feedback about that one, and
some not so happy.
Yeah, which is okay. That's
yeah,
fine. We wanted to hear about that as well, and actually, there's just in particular, we heard several people were a little irritated, like at one West Indian who is mad that we sort of disregarded the entire Hammer franchise, and in particular, which we mentioned, that during the 60s is when they introduced the Christopher Lee Draculas, and he was a great Dracula, and especially that first film, their first one, was a really good movie. I still can't put it in the top 5 all-time best of the 60s, but we understand. I mean, we expected.
Yeah. So thank you,
yes,
by the way.
Thank you.
We hope to get more of the same this week because
I think we might.
This week it's back to the 1970s. I love everything. I grew up in the 70s. I'm a 70s kid. You're an 80s kid. So we argue about that, just as we argue about the top movie in this countdown.
Yeah, there was a little disgruntledness about what we gave the number one, although I think most of the world is going to side with you.
But regardless of all the other great things about the 70s, it was a great decade for films and horror films in general.
Oh my God. It was, for my money, the best decade ever for horror movies ever. It was such a blossoming for horror movies. And one of the reasons that it was so great, the directors, the horror directors the Maverick horror directors who really made their presence known in the 70s, John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, Tobe Hooper, Wes Craven, Dario Argento, some of the all-time greatest, they started and really made their mark during the 70s. Speaking of Cronenberg, who, as you know, I adore.
Mm-hmm.
I love David Cronenberg. So if you want to take a chance, hop on over to screenrelish.com. George and I both write for screenrelish.com as well. And they do something every Saturday called the Saturday Screamer, which is super fun. It's just they recommend a horror movie for you to check out. And the one I did for this week is The Brood, the Cronenberg movie that I love so much, The Brood. I think one of the reasons why we may get some blowback on this particular countdown, and keep in mind, we're only doing 5 movies, is that we are skipping so many.
Yeah, there's a lot.
That we're skipping so many. And the thing is, basically, 1 through 4, foregone conclusion.
Pretty
Number
much.
5 could have been one of 1,000 movies.
Yeah, you probably have a good idea what 1 through 4 are going to be. Maybe not in the correct order, but number 5 is one that maybe a lot of people haven't really heard of.
Well, and not only that, I mean, there were just so many options. There were so many options. There were so many that we didn't include. And we got a lot of thank you for that, too. A lot of people kind of chimed in with what they thought we might want to add, what would be in their tops. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple that few people were gonna upset, like Chase TX, because both of them, he nominated 2. A lot of people not both of these 2. I'm going to bring him up because a lot of people nominated both of these 2 films. And one of them is Alien, which we're both going to say masterpiece.
Yes, love it.
As is Jaws.
Jaws. Oh.
And both of them are landmark horror movies, but the reason they didn't make them, they're really not discreetly horror movies.
Right.
They're not.
Many horrific elements in them, and they are fantastic movies. Don't get us wrong. But
when we decided to really sort of narrow down, we're sticking with specifically genre efforts. Mm-hmm. These are all horror movies. And another one, actually, a friend of ours, Corey Metcalf, who does other podcasts on Golden Spiral Media with us, the Triple Cast. He does that, for example. He voted for Halloween. That was popular. That got a lot of votes. That was a popular one for this. So, hint, hint. So anyway, let's jump in.
Yeah, this is one not as mainstream as numbers 1 through 4. It's Nosferatu the Vampire.
Der Fluch wird auf den Menschen lasten. Der Fluch des Vampirs Nosferatu.
So this one's from 1979. Werner Herzog, the director. One of the reasons why it made it, actually, to tell you the truth.
I love Werner Herzog.
Yeah, he's so great, and anytime one of the all-time great directors does a horror movie, you, I think, have to pay attention. He does something brilliant, and this is Dracula. Although he doesn't go specifically Dracula, what he does, and one of the reasons I love it so much, is because it's combined with Murnau's Nosferatu, the Max Schreck masterpiece, which is one of maybe quite possibly the best vampire movie ever made. So while it's the Dracula storyline, and he doesn't call the vampire Orlok, he calls him Dracula. The look that he gives, and it's Klaus Kinski, effortlessly weird Klaus Kinski, but he looks like the Max Shrek. So he looks like a rat.
Like he's an alien. Yeah.
He's got the dark circles. He's bald, pointy ears. His front teeth. He's very rat-like. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason that works so well in this movie is that while most Dracula tales, it's a very sexual kind of a thing, often a homoerotic kind of paranoia. Yeah. That's not what they do. This was a German film, and it is absolutely parallel with the Black Plague. So to have him be rat-like and completely asexual works really well in this. But one of the other reasons that it works so well, it's this surreal, dreamy quality that the whole movie has. Right. It's so macabre and creepy.
Which you could kind of tell from that little clip we played with the music. A foreign film, and then the way the music is also very dreamlike and orchestral, and it all feeds that same atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great word for it. It's incredibly atmospheric. The whole movie, it's like you're in this nightmare that you can't wake up from. And he does enough things to tweak the sort of tired Dracula storyline to keep you interested. And one of the things I love about it is that Lucy, Isabella Adjani, Lucy, gets to be the hero in this one, which is a nice change of pace. She's not just the lovely woman waiting for a man to save her.
Right.
And also, though, that her beloved Jonathan Harker, there's a nice, if you're not familiar with this one, but I mean, they do some interesting, ugly twists that really make this a horror movie. And it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So, I kind of feel like this was the most coveted spot, number 5, because there were hundreds.
Could have been anything.
Hundreds of options for that. And we went with Nosferatu the Vampire.
And one of the cool things of the backstory about this is Klaus Kinski, as you said, effortlessly weird, the star, and the director, Werner Herzog. If you believe legend, they just violently hate each other. And that's got to turn into quite a dynamic on the set.
Because they made several films together. And yeah, as rumor has it, I mean, violently is the word for it. They would throw things at each other. They would erupt into fisticuffs. They hated each other.
But it worked.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, I think Werner Herzog is an odd person, an odd bird. But I think Klaus Kinski, from everything I've ever read of him, is as weird in reality as he ever was in any movie, which is weird.
Yeah.
So that, and I think that you can sort of see it. There are so many great versions of this. Another great one, Shadow of the Vampire, from maybe 2000 or
Willem
so.
Dafoe.
Yeah, that's a great one. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are so many great versions with this particular rat-like version of the vampire, but this was just a hypnotic, lovely, creepy version.
So check it out if you haven't, from 79, Nosferatu the Vampire. Now we get into the heavy hitters.
Right.
And number 4, maybe a little low for some people's expectations. It's Halloween.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Yeah, this one came out in 1978. So I was 13, 14 years old, and I remember my friends, we snuck in. I mean, the theater where I grew up, they weren't really checking IDs. So we went in to see it in the theater, and we were freaked because there were so many things about this movie that started waves, copycat movies, and so many of these elements. Even if they weren't new, we wouldn't have seen them before, my friends and I. But it just blew our minds. And it started the wave of the teen slasher movies. After this, these sort of elements have now become parody, and you see them in comedy skits, in those god-awful scary movies, things like that. But back then, when it came out, it was all new. It was all terrifying. And you bring up a great point, because you know more about the history of horror movies than I do. This was the first movie really to bring the terror to the suburbs in America.
Absolutely. And I think that there are a lot of elements that made the movie so effective when it first came out, but I think that might be the one that shocked people the most. People were so you didn't have to go, backpacking. You didn't have to go out in the woods. You didn't have to go someplace creepy where you ask yourself, what am I doing here? Look what's going to happen. It's just going to come right knocking on your door with the trick-or-treaters. And it's just done so well. Haddonfield, just this lovely little suburb, and it is.
It freaked out, kids of our age, the age that I was at the time, and even adults back then, and even today, people that saw it back then
it was
are still
scarring.
freaked out.
Yeah, well, a good friend of ours, Celinda, she saw it when she was young as well. She saw it in the theater, and it scared her so badly. She will not call my phone. I have the ringtone is and the ring back as well is the theme from Halloween. She'll only text me. She will not call. And, I think that if you're young and you watch it today, like, oh, I got to watch the classics, I'm going to watch the movie Halloween, it's not going to come off because every movie since then has borrowed something. But, it had the boogeyman character, the faceless, speechless, unstoppable boogeyman character that every slasher has drawn from.
Oh, he had a face. William Shatner's face. That's such a great little tidbit from this movie. That was a William Shatner Captain Kirk mask. That's just so great. And go back to your ringtone because the music in this is so effective. And the legend goes, of course, John Carpenter not only composed it, but performed it. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about he has an album out right now of themes, which is very cool. But he just kind of threw it together just because he needed some music, needed something in there. And it works so well. Legend has it that he showed a cut of the film without music to producers, and they hated it. They hated the film. So he just threw together really quickly, just on a piano, something, and immediately classic. It's as creepy as it could possibly be. So then they never embellished. They didn't make it like the score, which is, one of the most effective elements of the movie is that spare, creepy score. A score I obviously love. Yep. And it created a couple of things, at the very end. I know it worked for me and my friends and I when we saw it, the fact that Michael Myers is not there.
Right.
He's dead. And they look back, he's gone.
He's gone.
Now that's such an overused crutch. But back then it seemed so, I'm not sure it was the first movie ever to use it, but it sure seemed like it.
Oh, yeah.
And
then the idea of the last girl.
The last girl, yeah.
Which I'm sure films had done before, but never in a way. It became the iconic last girl. Jamie Lee Curtis became the iconic last girl.
And she's very good.
Oh, that's another thing I think that separates Halloween from other films of the pack. Jamie Lee Curtis is very talented. She's talented in this role. And the last girl evolved over the years to be sort of vacuous, beautiful. Why is she being so stupid? But that's really not Jamie Lee Curtis in this. I mean,
no.
She comes off as, what the hell is going on? And she's trying really hard to figure it out. And she's trying to survive. And I mean,
think, survive on her feet. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, she personally became last girl in, Halloween 2 and Prom Night and Terror Train. I mean, that became her role for the longest time. But
we have to talk about that one time because I think Terror Train is underrated.
I do not.
Oh, that's okay. Maybe I need to watch it again. But that's one that Terror Train, because Prom Night is awful. But Terror Train, I seem to remember, had a few redeeming qualities. But it doesn't, nowhere near this list. So I digress. But the other thing about this movie, as minimalistic as it is, not only the music, but it seems very, the budget. Oh, sure. Donald Pleasance. And he was an esteemed actor. How did they get Donald Pleasance?
I don't know. I love him, though.
And he almost seems, it works for the character because in so many scenes in the movie, he almost seems like disgusted. Like, what am I doing here? But it works.
It does.
Because he's so exasperated with everybody because they won't take him seriously about how dangerous Michael Myers is. But he just seems like, what are you doing? I'm Donald Pleasance. Why am I here? But it works. And so many things about the movie is still so incredibly classic today. And it's a nice kind of a time capsule of life in the suburbs in 1978, and it was scary. And
it was.
To some people who don't like your ringtone, it still is.
So our next one is one where we feel like, so these two, we went back and forth. Which is 4, which is 3, which is 4, which is 3. We wound up making the next one number 3 because the performances are simply amazing. So our number 3 is Carrie.
Carrie White. The girl no one likes. The girl who lives in that creepy house with her crazy mother.
Show her that if she had remained sinless, the curse of blood would never have come on her.
The girl with the strange power.
If I concentrate hard enough, I can move things.
If you have a taste for terror, you have a date with Carrie.
And we have to make mention of a negative thread that these two films have in common, and that is PJ Souls.
George is not a fan of PJ Souls.
Not a fan of PJ. In Stripes, okay. But she's so annoying, especially in Carrie when she wears that damn hat. She even wears it to the prom. Can you imagine? You show up to pick her up. She comes wearing that hat with the lightning stripes on it. Like, did she take that hat into the dress store? I need a prom dress to go with this hat. Okay. Enough about PJ Souls. This is a great movie, and the performances are great, as you say, and it's got to start right at the top with Piper Laurie as Carrie's mother, who's just batshit insane.
Oh my God, she is.
And you believe every second she's a nut. You just believe it.
Not only that, I think one of the reasons that Sissy Spacek's performance works as well as it does is because you buy that being this woman's daughter would make you that woebegone, that, just an outcast, that much of one. You'd have no idea how to behave normally because this is what you get when you go home. It's both of them are, and both of them were Oscar nominated.
Yeah.
Both of them are just magnificent in this movie. Weird enough for it to be really a horror movie, but authentic enough that you don't feel like it's just this over-the-top nuttiness. They are great. Sissy Spacek is so wonderful in this movie. She's so tender, and one of the things about the film for me is that it is the pinnacle of mean girl cinema.
Oh, yeah.
No one's ever done it as well as that locker room plug-it-up scene. No one's ever done it that well.
Well, the locker room in Born Innocent is pretty mean, too, but let's not discuss that. But one of the things you were telling me, a very cool anecdote about when they were auditioning for this movie. Brian De Palma. Yeah, Brian De Palma and George Lucas were good friends, and they both auditioned simultaneously for Carrie and Star Wars. So everybody who auditioned was auditioning for both films. Like John Travolta was also auditioning for Star Wars. Amy Irving was also auditioning for Star Wars, and allegedly, she almost got the Princess Leia role, but she wound up getting Sue Snell, which, it's a great role, and she wound up, it didn't really hurt her career because what does it matter? She married Steven Spielberg and doesn't ever need to work again. So and divorced him. That's right. So that's why she doesn't need to work. That's where the real payday came in. Cha-ching. But now Brian De Palma, truth be told, is not one of our favorite directors. No, and I know that that's not going to go over that well with a lot of horror fans because he does have quite a canon, and a lot of people are very big fans of his. Personally, and it's the same reason why I'm not a huge fan of Dario Argento. I can't enjoy watching movies where the violence is as sexual as it is in most of the De Palma films because that really is a male fantasy. It is not a female fantasy. Right. And as a female, I can't really get behind it. Yeah, well, the entire movie Body Double is just a male fantasy for sure. Oh, my God, yes. And those... So it's a point well taken. The drill, there are a couple scenes in Body Double I like. But anyway... But this movie works on many levels with Brian De Palma. He did many things right in this movie. Oh, so well. And starting with streamlining the ending. That's right, because he adapted the screenplay. And of course, Carrie was Stephen King's first full-length novel, and it's a great book. It really is. But forgive me, King, I'm going to just get crucified by everybody, but King fans are probably going to shoot me. It's a better movie than a book. And part of the reason is that Stephen King doesn't end very well. A lot of times he just doesn't. Yeah. And he doesn't end this novel very well. It's sprawling. Carrie walks from the prom over to the bar. She's just walking all over town, and carnage follows. What De Palma did was streamline that. So it's, she takes care of everybody at the prom except the main problem, and then she just walks on home. And it's so much more effective in that way. It's so just closed in, and you just pared away all the extraneous stuff that you don't really need. And then that image of her walking all bloody down the street toward her house, just magnificent. And then, of course, that final hand up through the grave. Oh, my God, yeah. But streamlining the end of it's not like this is the only movie that does that. You think of something like Jaws. Yeah. The ending of the Jaws book was boring. Yeah. Just boring. And they turned it into such a fantastic ending. Oh, my God, just, of course, unbelievable and way over the top, but it works so well. So this is along the lines of that. A book and a movie are two different animals. Yes, they are. And it was very different. It required a different type of ending, and they got one. Like you say, it's streamlined like this. But, and it wasn't just the writing and it wasn't just the performances. One of the things that I think he does really well
for a very long time, the whole film has this cheesecloth look about it and this pleasant background music. It's got kind of a tampon ad feel about it, appropriately enough. Yeah. And for the longest time, if you don't really know what you're watching, you're rooting for her in one of these, sort of makeover teen movies that, oh, she's so nice. Look how pretty she looks. Oh, the nice boy's taken to the prom, but Love Among the Stars is not going to turn out that well. And that's the difference between horror cinema and regular cinema. Had this been a regular movie, it would have ended nicely because makeover movies do. But in horror movies, if you're going to take in the outsider and turn that doesn't end well. And Sue Snell is punished for being nice to the outsider.
Yeah. And we have to mention that years ago we won a Halloween costume contest by dressing up as Carrie and Tommy.
Yes, we did.
If we can dig up that picture, we'll put it on the blog. But that went over well. And then think about the people that are in this movie. John Travolta.
Yep.
Of course, Nancy Allen, because she was either married or
she was dating Brian
De Palma. Edie McClure was one of the girls. And then, Betty Buckley.
Oh, yeah.
Who's the chain smoking. That is so great. Chain smoking school counselor or teacher, and they're in the office there, and that principal keeps calling her Cassie, and then she flips the ashtray. I mean, so many of those elements are so 70s.
So 70s.
And it's hilarious to watch today. But
and the remake, one of the reasons I think the remake didn't work was that it lost that time capsule.
It did. There were a few reasons. I mean, we disagree a little bit on that. I think the remake was a little better than you do.
Yeah, I didn't like it at all.
But it does come back to, as much as we both like Chloe Grace Moretz, she was just too pretty.
She was miscast.
It was hard
she was very miscast.
Envision her as being unpopular and a freak, whereas Sissy Spacek, it was not. You believed it.
Yeah, you did.
And again, as great as Julianne Moore is as an actress, she played, Carrie's mom in the remake.
She's one of the greatest actresses ever.
She's great.
But Piper Laurie, you were terrified of Piper Laurie.
Just reached a crazy vibe that you couldn't believe it. So definitely a classic. It comes in at number 3 on our top 5 of the 70s, Carrie from 76. And here we go with the top 2 because we came to blows almost.
We did.
For this one. And we're going to need you to chime in about who was right because for number 2, it's Hope's favorite,
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
This is the movie that is just as real, just as close, just as terrifying as being there. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming, you'll start talking about it.
Yeah, Tobe Hooper's 1974 classic. This, and I sort of have the feeling not that many people are going to sort of side with me, but this would be my number 1. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is in my top 5 all time, not just horror movies, anything. My top 5 all time favorite movies. I love it so much. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And, it starts, one of the reasons that it's so good is because you, as an audience member, are not safe. And Tobe Hooper makes that clear. He abandons everything that you don't even realize you've come to rely on to let you know scares are coming. This is filmed in broad daylight. There is basically no score. There's no shadows. There's no lurking anything to sort of prepare you of what's going to happen. And one of my favorite things, Franklin Hardesty, right? Sally Hardesty's brother, Franklin, whiny and in a wheelchair and completely wildly unlikable. In the 1970s in particular, there were a ton of horror movies where the protagonist was, in one way or another, handicapped. And that made them seem more vulnerable, so it built tensions, but you knew that person would overcome in the end. You knew they would.
Not here.
Not Franklin. Not Franklin. So, just scene after scene after scene after scene, Tobe Hooper clarifies for you, you have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
And what does happen will be ugly.
Yep. And it works so well. And, just from the get-go, come on, that hitchhiker.
Oh, my God.
When you get people, you should have turned around right then because this is weird. But no, you're so right. Once you establish that feeling in the audience that,
I have no idea.
And for a lot of people, it might even be self-conscious. They don't realize all those things you just said about the history of horror movies.
But
they just know.
They just feel unsafe. I'm unsafe. This filmmaker is, Edwin Neal, by the way, is a hitchhiker, and Leatherface gets a lot of love, and rightfully so. And Gunnar Hansen was Leatherface in the original. He was magnificent, but Edwin Neal, that's the one to me. He was so creepy and great. Woo. He was so great. And then the dinner scene.
Oh yeah,
that's one of my favorite horror scenes ever.
And hang me on a hook. And then, yeah. And when he comes, when Leatherface just appears behind that door, this hulking, lurking figure, and just comes running out and grabs, and it's all so shocking and sparse, and you just feel
terrified, horrified.
Yeah, and out in the middle of the boonies.
Yeah.
Boy, it's just such a primal type of fear. A guy in a mask, and he's got these hooks and meat cleavers and chainsaws, and it still works today.
It does.
And speaking of Gunnar Hansen, that's another picture we have to dig up. You got your picture. We got to meet Gunnar Hansen
and Marilyn Burns,
who sadly passed away. Last year?
Last year, she did. She passed away last year.
But you got to get a picture with both of them, and they were very cool, very nice.
Oh my God, they were so nice. And it's funny. We can find that picture because my face I could not possibly.
Giddy.
Oh my God. So giddy.
And wasn't Gunnar Hansen at the time? He was talking about that he was writing a book.
Yeah, he was. He was writing a book.
We haven't heard anything because you put yourself on the mailing list.
I did.
I'll buy that book.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I remember he said, he's like, I'm not sure who the audience is for this book. I'm like, I am the audience for this book.
Exactly. But yeah, that was one definitely with staying power.
And it does have staying power, but one of the reasons it was so huge when it came out, in very much sort of the way Blair Witch managed, they said based on a true story, which is it's very, very loosely. They pulled a couple of facts from the life of Ed Gein. It's one of just like Psycho. It's one of 1,000 movies that are based loosely on the life of Ed Gein, and he made furniture out of human bone. So it's really only that, the grave robbery part of it. He wasn't a chainsaw massacreist or a cannibal or anything like that. But they used that based on a true story, and then the footage is so home movie like that it just fed an imagination that 1974 at the time nothing else had ever been like that, had come out like that. And of course, since then a billion. And of course, I think you can sort of blame the found footage a little bit on that because of just the style. Obviously, nobody's filming, but just the style that he used.
Yeah, I can see that.
But at the time, it was. It was an event. People were just amazed and horrified. Although I think it's safe to say, perhaps not as much as they were by our number one film.
You probably guessed it. From 1973, The Exorcist.
You tell me you know for a fact that an exorcism wouldn't do any good. You tell me that.
The sour is mine.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
You'd like that?
Intensely.
The power of Christ compels you!
What else really needs to be said about The Exorcist? I can remember when it came out in 73, I'd have been 9 years old about, and certainly I didn't see it in the theater, but I remember walking to school with my friends, and we talked about it because we were already hearing the stories. Most of them probably not true. Oh, people were just passing out in the aisles. They were vomiting. They had to call the squad because of so many things that were on the screen. You think about that now, and I can see why that sort of legend grew, because even watching it today, I see some of those scenes, and I thought, this came out in 1973. Really?
Yeah.
Just some shocking stuff, even by today's standards.
Right.
That in 1973, you've got this 12-year-old girl saying those things and doing those things.
With a crucifix.
And looking like that.
Yeah.
And wow.
Yeah.
Just shocking. But beyond a shock level, it just works so well as a horror film, as a scary movie. And part of it, a lot of it starts in two things from the beginning. It's a very slow build.
Yeah, which nobody does anymore.
By today's standard. No. It takes a while. She goes through all those tests. She comes down.
And they start in Iraq.
Pees on the rug.
Yeah,
they start in Iraq, and that's another point that you've made a couple of times, and it's very well taken. Is that how they start wide and get very, very focused? Yeah,
because the film, of course, starts in Iraq. Marin is out there doing some archaeological digs, and it's big landscape shots. You're outdoors. everybody looks small because you've got so much of the landscape. And then they move to Georgetown and they bring it in a little bit. And you've got people walking around. You still have a full shot, but it's closed in. And then there's all the medical testing, and then it's closed in even farther. And then you're in her bedroom,
Just
and it's
her bedroom.
tiny.
Yep.
It's just you and 3 or 4 other people in this bedroom, trapped. And Friedkin is a genius.
Yeah.
And there are 1,000 ways in which we can point to that in this film, but I love that the way it opens up and then it just gets closer until you're trapped in that room with the devil.
That's funny you said it because we got to interview Linda Blair a couple of years ago.
She's a big dog fan.
She is. She's very much into dog and animal rights, and God bless her. So it was hard to get her to talk really about this movie. She wanted to talk about her charity, which is fine. But I did ask her about that, about the reputation that William Friedkin had for being difficult.
Yeah.
And she just laughed and she said, well, he's a genius, isn't he? So that kind of told a lot. But she has obviously great memories of that. And you really can't downplay how good she was.
No.
When you think about that, she was 12 years old. And what they put her through, and I know it wasn't her voice, and we'll get to that because the voice is so well done. But still, think about that performance. Academy Award nominated and very deserving. Is just fantastic. All the performances.
Yeah.
You know, Max von Sydow as Father Merrin. It's crazy. He was 44 years old.
Isn't that funny? When he was in Shutter Island a few years ago, I remember thinking to myself, how old must he be? He's been an old man since 1973.
No, he was 44. It was the makeup. And from what I read, Dick Smith, the makeup guru, did his makeup.
Sure.
And very well done.
Very, very well. Because you never think to yourself, it's a guy in old person makeup. You never think that. You just think, it's just
all
this
that
old
great
man.
makeup they did on Linda Blair.
Oh,
and,
my.
The voice was an actress named Mercedes McCambridge.
How perfect was she?
Did, from what you read, all sorts of things like drinking whiskey and chain smoking and eating raw eggs to get her voice like that. Just perfect.
Yeah.
And so many great things about the movie.
One of my favorite little quick, weird pieces of trivia, though, is that Max von Sydow has now, in the course of his career, played an exorcist, of course, also Jesus Christ, also Satan. So, of course, he's been around a long time, so you get a lot of opportunities, but I think that's kind of fun.
Yeah, but it's such a classic even today. And you see the director's cut now, and you add the things like the spider walk down the stairs, which apparently Friedkin, when they filmed it, thought that, it was too much too soon.
Right.
Because we talked about it's a slow build, and it works. And also, at the time, in 1973, he didn't feel he could hide the wires well enough.
Right.
Of course, today, CGI done. But they'd had a contortionist do it with wires and harnesses, and he didn't feel that you could get those wires out of the screen, out of the shot. But, of course, now you can see it on the director's cut, and it's very shocking.
It is.
And you can see he kind of has a point. It comes on early, and it's such a jolt before you're really ready for some of those jolts that come later. But it works, and it's such a great movie. Not only because some movies work on a shock value level and only on a shock value level, and this
which
one
means
doesn't.
Once you've seen it once, you don't need to see it again because it's no longer shocking, and that's not the case of this movie.
No.
It is effective every time you see it.
Yeah. Boy, The Exorcist from 1973. So what do you think? I mean, would that be your number one? I know for a lot of people it would, but maybe not. Maybe you're voting with hope for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Or maybe you're just irritated that we left off things like Suspiria or Don't Look Now or The Omen or Black Christmas or The Hills Have Eyes. Dawn of the Dead. Blacula. Yeah. You know, I love Blacula.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge, we know how many great movies we left up. The 70s is my favorite decade of horror film. I love all of them, good, bad, and ugly. I love all the horror films out of the 70s. They just had their own flavor. They were so raw and new and groundbreaking, and turned out some of the greatest directors of the genre. So
let us know your thoughts on Twitter. Obviously, we love to keep the conversation going. It's a lot of fun. We're at Mad Wolf. That's MADDWOLF.
We also, you know what, The Exorcist, speaking of which, we want to give a quick plug because our next live event, we're going to show The Exorcist, and it's going to be our first double feature for the Live Fright Club. We're going to pair The Exorcist with The Conjuring. Yeah. How fun is that?
Yeah, because they're both obviously great movies, but they're both supposedly based on true events.
And they're both possession movies, and they're both movies that you want to see on a big screen.
Yeah.
They just look great. You know, they're big, darkened theater movies to watch. So,
and if you didn't know it, actually, the actor who played Father Dyer in The Exorcist was an actual priest and has said, I guess, that 80%, his estimation was 80% of the events in The Exorcist are true.
Right.
From a possession of a young boy.
Right, so that'd be the biggest difference.
Yeah. So anyway, great double feature. We look forward to that and look forward to your comments. So keep them coming. You can also always comment on the Golden Spiral Media voice feedback line. That's 304-837-2278.
Or you can leave a voice feedback right there on the blog on Golden Spiral Media. Next week, we're actually going to sort of break. We're going to take a break from our decades countdown because we get a chance.
We're not going to go right to your favorite decade ever, the 80s? Play some Duran Duran in the background?
Can we play Duran Duran?
No, this is fun because we're looking forward to some movies coming out, especially one that we're going to see in a couple of days.
Yeah, we're going to watch It Follows actually tomorrow morning. And then we're going to talk about that and also the other 4 or 5 movies that we are most excited, horror films we're most excited to see this year.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do next week. And then we'll go back to the 80s the following week.
So fun. So hopefully you'll be there as always. I am George Wolf.
I'm Hope Madden.
And this is the Fright Club podcast. And until next time,
stay frightful, my friends.